Thank you. Great. So welcome everybody today on Wednesday, the 6th of April to the next in our mental fitness series. And today we're talking about a topic that was requested by participants in some of our previous sessions. So we always have a survey, as you know, at the end. And what you came back to us with was that you wanted a session to be focused on prioritization skills and productivity. And so we've taken that on board. And today's session with our expert speaker, as always, Ross McWilliam, is going to be on that very important topic. And I'm looking forward to learning about this and not getting distracted. Ross, over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. I'll apologise beforehand. I'm a bit nasally this morning, probably doing too much work and not taking my own advice and slowing down so I can speed up again. But hopefully you'll be able to hear me and take away some important bits of information that I've learned over the years. And I'll give you a few anecdotes as well to give a bit of context to how we can prioritise our work. I'll just start off with one thing, one overview of it. Be careful sometimes that you don't get so precise, so efficient that you lose that rapport at work. And you've done all the right things to manage your time, to save your time, to make your time effective. Yet you've missed the obvious thing of building rapport and making somebody else feel valued. So make sure you don't win at the expense of a bigger loss. And you can interpret that how you will. But I've seen it happen quite a bit with people who are really good at managing the time, but forget the bigger picture. So let's move on then. I always talk about a group agreement to make people feel safe and secure online. Please put your comments and observations and questions in the chat box. I'll stay around after 12:45 if you want to talk to me and share something with me. And you've got my email if you want to send me an email as well. Really important that you feel safe and secure in this environment. So the learning outcomes are very simple this time. And I like the simplicity of this. We're going to look at lists. Then look at how we prioritize between urgent and non-urgent. I'll give you some tips on time management. And then meetings. You know, big question on meetings is, are they necessary? And I think in COVID, we don't have to, we couldn't do the face-to-face. And therefore, maybe we had Zoom meetings, which were great at first, but maybe we've gone past that now and thinking, okay, it's Zoom, but do I really need the meeting? And I think that's an interesting concept. And efficacy, how much we can be effective and efficient at work. So lists, are they necessary? Yeah. A collection of jobs and intend to tick all the jobs on the list. Okay. And I used to work a long time ago in education. And I saw teachers were the archetypal holders of lists. And they can be very empowering to capture all the jobs in a busy school day, but self-defeating if not achieved. So like you value yourself a bit less if you didn't get to the end of your list. I actually saw teachers when they got to the end of the list, add more jobs to the list to supercharge them somehow. So it's almost like the tail of the list is wagging the dog of the teacher. And I don't think that's a good place to go to. Now there's a guy, I read a long time ago, one of his books, and this is a nice book. It's only about 20 pages long, 21 tips about procrastination and getting more done. It's called Eat That Frog. And I took out 2 tips relevant for us today. The most important job, get that done first. The big frog, get that done first in your day. Now, that's what he says. Some days I can do that. Some days I want to build momentum and do some small jobs and get going to the big job. So it depends how you feel, but that's his experience. And this guy, was over 75 years old, and he did a lot of 40, 50 years of this professional development. The second one is, if jobs don't get consistently done, take it off the list. And if it's really important, it will come back again. It takes a bit of bravery to do that. But it's nice at the end of the day or the end of the week, looking at your list and you haven't achieved something, you take a hit on your self-esteem and you feel a bit worthless because you haven't achieved all your jobs. The question is, were those jobs achievable in the first place? So some of the jobs that are not getting done, take them off for a while. I think that's a very powerful, empowering place to be as well, because otherwise it's driving you to feel a bit guilty about yourself. So lists, yeah, use them, but be careful you don't drive and your tail wags the dog. Prioritization. Okay. So different steps on this, and I'll show you a graphic in a second. You can create a detailed to-do list with project steps, as a lot of good managers do anyway. You plot the to-do list with an urgent and important matrix, and non-urgent and non-important. And I'll come to that, as I said, in a second. You can time block your day to do these tasks, the most important first and urgent first, then gradually get down through your day to the less important and unimportant tasks. Always leave a bit of room for the unexpected. Okay, I know we're trying to manage our time and being productive, but sometimes things are out of our control that are really important. And a little tip for you, and I've seen this in operation: batch process your emails. I don't know what you think about this, Jenny. 2 to 3 hours or every 24 hours. I know professionals who, if it's not urgent, they might come back to you a week later. What's your view on that, Jenny?
It depends on who it is, and if it's a client asking a question, a week would be a bit too long, wouldn't it? But I agree with the principle of batch processing in blocks, so that you don't lose focus on a project if you're trying to move that forward. If you're always interrupting it with emails, and you don't get back to the right point and progress your project properly.
Yeah, I think what Brian Tracy was saying well about procrastinations, emails are a very convenient and immediate way to be procrastinate something. They come in, oh, I'll just do this, I'll just do that, because I don't want to face that bigger job, that bigger frog. So they can be distractors. So I think batching is important. My only reservation is if you leave it too long, and what's too long, I don't know for different professionals, but certainly over a day, I feel unprofessional, I feel a bit rude. But I know some high-flying professional people I've worked with, they don't bat an eyelid for 2 or 3 days, and they'll come back to you later on. It depends where you are on the pecking order of your organization and how you see your interactions. So let's go a little diagram here for you. You might have seen this one before, and I've got 2 of these diagrams. So important and urgent, not everything's important, not everything's urgent. So really scale that down to what really is important, what really is urgent, to minimize it. Otherwise, you'll be fighting fires, deal with emergencies all day long, and you won't be productive in terms of either your tactics, what you do, or your strategy, how you do it. So the second one is, prioritize and schedule the important and not urgent jobs. Okay. So this is where you do your day, you start organizing it, you deal with the things that need your attention. If you don't get attention, there's going to be big problems. But then, let's look along things that are important, but they don't have to be done at this very moment. The next category, 3, is, it talks about delegation here. It's not important, but it's urgent. Do I have to deal with it? Can somebody else deal with it so it gets that important thing ticked, but it doesn't take my time up? And I think some of the best managers I've ever worked with, and to that extent, chairman of football clubs, they would delegate, but they wouldn't delegate everything. And here's the problem. If you delegate everything, you can sometimes take your finger off the pulse of what's actually happening. So, and I find that a lot when people are really struggling, they're under the crossfire of lots of work and lots of pressure and lots of volume, they delegate everything and they lose the focus on the business. The 4th category, not important, not urgent, that's spam email, that meeting that doesn't have any benefit for you, somebody's wanting something off you that's not relevant. Really, you've got to delete those. And that's a bit ruthless, but it's necessary. And I think ultimately people respect you for that if it's done in a nice way. So it's working out on that prioritization list, how we do that. So that's the concept, but let's look at the detail. The next diagram shows us some detail about urgent, not urgent. Okay, so look at the top left. Urgent could be some crises, emergencies like the pandemic. Yeah, pressing problems that are getting worse by the hour, if not by the day. Tasks are relying on you to do something so somebody else can do their job. And particular deadlines for different projects and different clients. Yeah, I think we can all agree that's pretty urgent. And non-urgent jobs, they're reviewing and preparing and strategizing. They're really important, but you know what? You don't have to be done this very moment. Maybe we can delay them, put them in abeyance for a little bit, and then come back to them. We've got a little bit more time to do that. Not important, as I said before, those emails and phone calls. Some meetings, and I get people now to question, do we need a meeting? And do we need a meeting online? Can it be a quick phone call, or can it be a quick email? Or can I come back to you next week? And I think you can buy yourself some time like that rather than responding all the time face to face or online. And I think I've seen a change in the workplace where people are a bit more judicious in the time, how effective it's going to be for me. And not urgent, not important, social media, casual phone calls, online shopping, the list goes on there, doesn't it? But again, the distractors, the procrastinating things, and sometimes we get into this sort of behavior when we're stressed, we're anxious, and then we lose that focus, we lose that productivity. So just be aware of that bottom last category, bottom right, because you might be doing that and you're flustered and you're anxious, but it's not helping you. Okay, so there are some examples of practical things that we talk about in urgent and important. Okay, time management, always an interesting one. Many books have written on time management. And I've spoken to people over the years who profess this is the way to do it, and somebody else contradicts them, and this is the way to do it. There's always going to be a bespoke element for you in this. It's organizing and scheduling your activities efficiently. That's efficiently for you. Okay, and this is where you can get some good tips from books, but ultimately it's got to blend into your way of operating. So these are some generic tips. Use them or not. I'm not saying you must use these, but obviously keeping a planner so you can see what's coming, what's on the horizon, what you need to look at. And I think if you are well organized and you're communicating with your clients, they recognize this. You're thinking ahead all the time without being a nuisance. But I know we've got a meeting in 3 weeks' time. I just thought, make sure you've got all the information I've sent you last week. Have you got the materials? If so, great. I look forward to seeing you next few weeks. So keeping a planner and then using that effectively. Set a timer. I don't do this. Do you set a timer, Jenny, on your work to make sure you're managing your time?
Yeah, I do the Pomodoro technique
Okay.
where you
Okay.
do 25 minutes and then a 5-minute break and then 25 minutes.
Yeah, we use that for revision a little bit, don't we,
Yeah,
as well?
yeah.
I don't do that. I'm quite extensive in my time. I give everything to it all the time. It's probably why I'm a bit under the weather today, but maybe I need to do that technique a bit more. I do use it for revision. But yeah, it's got to work for you. If you feel a pressure with a timer, then maybe it's working against you a little bit. I think certainly schedule your hours. And I think, working out when's the best time to do your work, and, short and long-term goals. But the next point is using your energy wisely for me. And this depends on the next point. When are you most productive? So personally, I'm very much more productive in the mornings. It gets later in the day, and certainly in the evenings, I can do some work, but it's a big ask motivation-wise to get started, albeit when I've started, I can go on for several hours. So I think working out when you're most productive, then you've got to align that with the company goals and your management team. What do they expect from you? And it's no issue you're saying you're more productive at night when everybody's gone home. You've got to align it with their work schedules and work times. So I wouldn't say there's a hard and fast list on your time management, but work it for you. Find out when you feel the most energetic to work and productive, but align it with your colleagues. Okay, let's go to meetings. Okay, the key questions on meetings. Is the meeting necessary? I used to work for 2 chairmen at Preston North End Football Club when I was commercial manager. And one of the chairmen, a self-made multimillionaire, always questioned, do we need this meeting, Ross? It was his first question all the time. And I had to justify it to him or not. And if I couldn't justify it, the meeting wouldn't happen. Another boss I had was very particular on the meeting. So when we went into the meeting, he would say, I want to know about your profit and loss. I don't want to know about excuses. I don't want to know about money you're owing or what debts you've got. I want to know what's happening right now at this hour. And he was very much a detailed person. And he would go around the room and give everybody 2 minutes each, the heads of department. So that was his type of meeting. And he was very much on the time management side. That meeting had to last no more than 45 minutes. Going back to this meeting now, is the meeting necessary? Can it be time agreed? Again, some of our managers always agree that. excuse me. If yes, who needs to be present? Do we all need to be there? Can it be done more efficiently online? If no, can you question its outcomes? And a good question to look at these, aren't they? To ask yourself, do we really need this? Can it be delayed, postponed, or even stopped? Cancelled? Excuse me. How many meetings are urgent, important, or necessary? So I'll say that again for you. How many meetings are urgent, important, or necessary? And again, going back to that matrix before, if you're always running around trying to fight fires, you might fight the fires, but eventually you're probably going to lose that scenario, aren't you, where you're always trying to fight the fires because you're not developing as a person, and you'll get worn out and you become less effective. So I think meetings are good, but they can take a big chunk of your time up. But if they're not working for you, go through these questions and see if you can come up with a better solution than just having a meeting, because that's what we normally do.
There's also something here, isn't there, about the kind of preparation for the meeting that then makes it more valuable. And so having the agenda in advance, you know, documents shared that need to be read, obviously, sort of meeting etiquette almost that would help it be more efficient if it were taking place.
Yeah, you know, obviously the agenda. I've worked in councils before where the agenda comes a set number of days before the meeting, at least a week before. You can, any other business, you can add it onto it there. And then when you come to the meeting itself, it's very structured and rigid. And if you haven't put any other business on there initially, you can't put any on the day. So the pre-planning is a good point, Jenny. It's something that, you know, I probably omitted that because I just do it as a matter of course. But yeah, communicating with someone beforehand, agreeing that the context and content of the meeting is crucial. You're not really flushing around waiting for something or with something missing in a meeting, because you've wasted time and you're not being effective. Okay, efficacy, the ability to produce a desired result or intended result. And we talked last time about, you know, in our comfort zone, which is great. But we need to get into that stretch zone at times. The stretch zone is where we're pushing ourselves a little bit, we're meeting targets or achieving things, and we feel a bit uncomfortable, but in a nice way. When we get into the panic zone, we're fighting fires, that analogy I used before. That's something where you're going to lose. You could lose sooner rather than later, but it's almost a guarantee. If you're panicking all the time, the quality work won't follow either. And, you know, that's just, you know, there's no set questions for that. How do you feel at this moment in time? Are you off too often in the panic zone? Are you nowhere near the stretch zone? Yeah. And what is it about your management style that leads you into those areas? So we need to get out of our comfort zone. Absolutely. Yeah. Set the SMART goals. Now, some people don't like SMART targets, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timed. But I think for me, time is important, achievable, and very specific. So the S and the A and T for me are very important on that. And the danger you've got, though, with too many goal setting is you can become analysis paralysis, where you're thinking too much, writing stuff down and planning it, and yet the reality is it's passing you by without you making an input into something. And I'm a big believer, and I used to work a lot in schools, we call it assessment for learning. So when you do something and you get some feedback, that informs your next move, which could make your plans, original plans, a bit more redundant. So this assessment for learning is an ongoing movement where you get feedback and it feeds forward into your next plan. And I think that's the smart bit of this. Always seeing that bigger picture of where we're going. And I think the good managers amongst us will not just do the tasks they're given, they'll be looking for where these tasks are going to end up at, where's the next area of focus we need to be on, and how can I assist in a more wider ranging role, okay, without losing your remit of your job roles and responsibilities. Reframe obstacles, easy said, difficult to do at times. But, you know, obstacles, you know, I don't like the word obstacles. I would say challenges to be beaten. People say problems, you know, and I think when you're talking in that sort of language, subconsciously we're thinking that we might not achieve something. So it could almost be reframe opportunities. And I think every day is an opportunity to improve. And watch for burnout. I'm probably experiencing a bit of that at the moment. And in very simple terms, if you are irritated with colleagues, you're not being as effective in the workplace, and you're tired, you've probably got some aspect of burnout there. Okay. So just be very careful. You know, do as I say, not as I do, so to speak. Now, that guy there, many people might know him. He's not going through a good period at the moment. In fact, he was very lucky to keep his job a couple of weeks ago. Eddie Jones, the England rugby union manager, had 2 back-to-back dismal campaigns on the Six Nations. But he's always looking to improve, always getting out of his comfort zone. So he talks about inviting and watching other elite coaches. So don't feel like a competition, and it's not comparison. He looks about it more as collaboration. And I think once you use that word collaboration more, and sharing ideas and wanting to learn and improve, that's when you're going to make great sustained progress. It's when you're fearful of somebody else, it's competition, that you don't produce your best work. And also when you're collaborating, you're not just giving something, you're getting something back as well. And that's what good professionals do. They give and they take. So he looks about learning from other sports, and not just rugby, other sports. How do they do it in their sport? What can he take from their sport to put into his sport? Learning from the experts in behavior, experts in team building, experts in aggression, that controlled aggression. And the last one's an interesting one. Family drivers. What was the motivation growing up? How can he use that motivation in a modern context from somebody's childhood or somebody's trauma or somebody's experiences, and remind that person individually when they're on the pitch or before they go onto the pitch, these are the reasons why you're here today. And I think he gets the best out of individuals by looking at those family drivers, and the impact of our, growing up, and our experience from our parents, our genetics, and that wider environment is such a massive driver that many of us are not aware of. So Eddie Jones is quite, maybe one of the reasons he's kept his job despite the poor results. Now, we talked about measurable goals before in the SMART acronym there. SMART goals for me, we talked about there, are important. But as I said to you, I'm very particular on being very specific. Is it achievable? And what's the time scale? Okay. And I think ultimately you will be judged on performance. And if you can't create evidence to prove your performance one way or the other, even if you've got what you think is a good result, if you can't prove it, then you could be vulnerable. And I think, to understand this equation very well, you've got to make sure you've got some evidence. So that's the key bit for me, producing the evidence to show that you achieve your goals. Just been over that. Brilliant. So the bigger picture. Okay, we often talk about strategy and tactics. Strategy is like the helicopter view, looking down on the playing pitch, and the tactics is actually on the pitch doing the stuff. And sometimes there's a phrase that people often use with me, and anybody, in fact. You're working in the business but not on the business, so you're so busy with the tactics doing something that you don't see the strategy. Where's the business going to? Has this business become obsolete? Is it becoming obsolete? And history is littered with organizations and certainly businesses that become obsolete sometimes overnight. An online recording from the pandemic, something that, Zoom, their share price rocketed when we hit the pandemic, and this new innovation, this need for new innovation happened. So if you don't watch it, you're too busy with your tactics, you don't understand your strategy and that assessment for learning before, you're not changing as the world's changing. And some of the key problems that you'll experience are somebody's very good tactically on the ground, but with a poor strategies. So you're doing all you're asked to do really well, but it's not making an impact. Somebody can have a very effective strategy. This is what we need to do. We're ahead of our competitors. That's a great game plan, but we're not implementing the factors we need to do to achieve this target. And I said before, very briefly, an obsolete strategy in this day and age now, things become obsolete very quickly indeed. And the busy fool tactics of running around doing something, how effective are you? And many businesses look about profit lines. And if you're not making money, I don't care how nice a person, how good a job you're doing, if you're not making money, for many businesses, that's the deciding factor. So strategy and tactics, very important. Don't get hung up on one too much rather than the other ones, but always looking up to where this is going to. And reframing obstacles or challenges. We've talked about this in passing before, about traveling and the workplace, online activities, reduced office space costs, all those sort of things that when something negative, perceived to be as negative, happens, there's almost always a positive side to it. And if you want to be productive and effective in the workplace, it's working this out. There's many people who don't like change, but change is necessary. The only constant in life is change, and those who can adapt to it will probably be the winners. And so when people say, yes, I'm resilient, I can work at something, I'll never let go of it, I like that, but I like the interpretation of resilience more to do with adaptability. So to me, to be efficient and effective, this efficacy, you've got to be adaptable. So what have we learned very quickly? Lists can be empowering, but also very, very much self-defeating. Prioritizing to urgent and minimize that to important, to non-urgent, then not important. Even delete that last one. Use your time effectively, and I would say few or no spontaneous interruptions. Control your working arena, but don't lose, as I said at the start, that rapport with people. Always ask the question, are these meetings necessary? Are they being productive? And think about yourself and the system that you use. And just to remind you, always try and measure and get the evidence is one part of that equation. And the other part of the equation is to make your plans, but don't be scared of feeding forward with your assessment for learning. So do something, take the feedback, and that might inform your strategy differently. Okay, I've given a lot at you again today, and I know we've got a bit more time today, so it'd be a nice opportunity, Jenny, if we have any particular or specific questions or even any general observations on that.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A in the chat. If anyone wants to put anything in there, please do. And whilst you're thinking about that, I think there are some really good online tools that help with efficacy, aren't there, around things like Asana and Monday.com and the other brands available. But the things that you can do to pause your emails, to have delayed messages coming through if you really want to focus on something without interruption. So there's lots available there to help as well. I've got one question in from Sophie. How do you suggest and advise you stay in the stretch zone and don't go over to the panic zone? Really good question, Sophie.
Yeah, that's a general comment, and we need to put some detail on that. And again, it's being self-aware. If you're going too much into that panic zone, you're high performing. If you high perform for too long, your body's on alert all the time, it's going to tire you out and drain you. Not only will it drain you, you probably won't perform at the highest level as often as you need to. So how do we stop that happening? If you feel that it is getting a bit too much, and I talk about stress in terms of 3 factors: frequency, intensity, and duration. If you find something is a bit too frequent, it's too intense, or it's lasting too long duration, that's always a good acronym to use. Am I going through FID at the moment? And then sometimes it's about pulling back and doing a bit less. Sometimes it's about having a complete contrast for a period of time as well. But we need to get into that stretch zone for sure, if you want to improve as a professional. So I talk about stress in terms of not the panic, but the necessary to go into that stretch zone to improve myself. But as you're seeing today, I pushed a bit too much recently, and I need to retreat back and have a bit of contrast and have a change. it's quite difficult because when you're in it, it's very difficult for you to see it. So to keep out of that panic zone, you need some good co-workers, somebody you can share thoughts with and views was to get an alternative viewpoint of it. Am I working too much? Am I going towards that burnout zone? Give me your feedback. So I'm that good, trusted professional colleague and a non-professional work colleague. It's a very powerful tool indeed, just to get a bit of alternative feedback. Because very often when we're in that burnout stage, we can't see it because we're contaminated. So having that trusted other professional, workplace or not, is a good way to do that. But remember, and there's a woman from Stanford University, Alia Crum, and she talks about stress. We seem to see it as the bad enemy, but she said, redefine your relationship with stress, and rather than see it as nerves, see it as excitability, and which is great, but be careful you're not excited for too often for too long. That frequency, intensity, and duration.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you. Had an interesting question, another good one in from Julie, who says, when it comes to studying, she finds herself very good at self-sabotage. I.e., if on a Monday she hasn't completed as much as she set out to do, it puts her back for the rest of the week, similar to what you were saying, Ross, to the point where she'll think, I'll start again next Monday. How can she stop that?
Yeah, and that's partly to do around the thing we talked about with lists. If you don't get to the bottom, your self-worth is attached to that. But you could say every day is a new start, but you could say every hour is a new start as well. And I think we're very quick to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So, one little thing's bad, it's going to probably go bad, this catastrophization. Let's just throw it all away. Let's do it again. And what you're doing in that very moment is you're procrastinating, which makes the actual job of starting even much more harder. So my view on this is, if you're going to stop it and do it again next week, it becomes much harder to do that. And you've got to work through the first 15 minutes. The 15-minute period of starting work is very important. So when you think of throwing it all away and catastrophizing it, I'm not good enough, my self-worth, what am I doing this job? I'm never any good in the first place. I'm just hanging on. We talked about imposter syndrome. I would say, and try and work through that first 15 minutes when you engage with your work. And you'll find after 15 minutes, you might surprise yourself you've actually gone on with it because you're not letting those distracting thoughts come and sabotage you. So that 15-minute rule is a very important one for me. So if you try that next time you feel like dumping it for a week, just try the 15-minute rule. And again, what Jenny said before with the timer, I used to call it the power hour, 25 minutes revision or work and 5-minute break, and 20 minutes again to learn something new, another 5 minutes to remember what you've all done in the last 50 minutes, then finish for the hour. So I think to block things out, but at the same time, don't put too much pressure on yourself.
It's good advice. Okay, does anyone else want to put something in? Whilst you're thinking of questions, Rush, should we go on to the next slide?
Yeah.
And just I'll talk a little bit about what's coming up. You know that we have lots of support for you on the microsites, but a couple of sessions coming up to flag for everybody is Ross is joining us on the 10th of May in a kind of combined approach. He's going to be in one of our Manchester centres and St James's Palace, and he will also be streaming that via Zoom. So that's on the 10th of May. And it's in Mental Health Awareness Week, and the theme of that is around sort of loneliness and connection. So we're going to talk about positive psychology to overcome those things. So if you're in Manchester at the St James's Centre that day, do join in person, otherwise it will be online. And then we've got Ross is coming back to talk with us online on the 29th of June. And again, this is something that you flagged in the survey responses, that you wanted some confidence building and practical tips on good public speaking, and who better to hear from that than on Ross, so who is not well today. So what I'm just going to do is put into the chat for everybody the survey for today's session, and I'd be grateful if you could just take a minute now whilst I open up the next question.
I'll just turn off screen for a second. And I'll
Great.
see if I'll
Okay.
put some
So
chat. Yeah.
the next question comes in asking about exams, and somebody says they find exams really stressful, to the point that they can't even tell people when they're booked, as they find that people asking them about the exam adds to the pressure. And is there any advice to see exams in a positive light rather than a fear?
Yeah, and once that fear sort of gets hold of you, or you think the perception is getting hold of you, it's a slippery slope. And it comes down to, the opposite of imposter syndrome, that self-belief that you're worth something. And you've got yourself positioned now to do an exam to take you on to the next level. And I often see it when people, if you want a silly example, when they do X Factor and they get up on the stage and then they get all nervous. And I'm shouting at the TV screen, well, you applied to the job and you want to do this, and yet you're going to stop yourself from getting what your potential is because you're too nervous. Yet nobody forced you into it. And I think if you're feeling that thought all the time, that you're paralyzed by a fear, then maybe think about doing a different sort of job. I don't mean that flippantly, because I want you to enjoy your lives. But you find with fear can be very quickly flipped around into excitement and opportunity and the next level, the next house, the next pay rise, the next relationship. And I think I always put things in those contexts. And I'll tell you something a bit more weird about me as well. When I do exams, I never get scared. In fact, I get the opposite. I get excited to show off what I've known. And that's my sort of framework around exams. I want to show you what I've learned. So this is my opportunity to show you that, rather than I'm thinking I won't be able to remember the stuff, I'm scared, I'll never pass it. I think the complete opposite. Not in a big-headed way. I put all that work in studying. I want the exam to come now to show you what I can do. And a good comparative example of that is when you do, for instance, a master's, as I did a few years, well, 30 years ago, where you have an open-ended thesis that goes on and on and on, and it becomes tiring and you wear yourself out with it. Where in the exam, you've got a specific date and you've got a specific timetable of what to do, to study, to do it, to achieve it. So my views is that I'd rather have an exam any day than a long-winded thesis. I think you're going to know when your exam is and have your preparation intent in place and intent with it. But I think you need to change why you're there in that room in the first place. You're there to improve your life. And I think it's a very good quality that we want to improve ourselves. But if it becomes too much in that stretch zone, that you're trying to improve too much, and maybe you need to take a step back or a step sideways. But I certainly think there's a very fine line sometimes between fear and excitement, and just a bit of a break, a bit of catch yourself, get it in context. This is an opportunity, not a threat. There's a good one for you. It's an opportunity, not a threat. And that's very powerful then to actually say, right, on to the next one. And I'm talking for somebody who failed all their exams at school and then never failed one ever since. And I'm 61 now. And I'm not particularly clever in sort of an Oxford University course. I was teaching some graduates yesterday. But I think the mindset allows us, first of all, to anticipate the good things. And if we're doing it in that way, the actual brain works with our motivation to help us memorize better as well. So everything's a win-win situation when you're looking forward to a challenge.
Yeah, that takes me back, Ross, to our discussion in March with Haider Ali. Haider Ali, our apprentice who just finished level 7, and he had the phrase, "Grow through it, don't go through it," which is, I think has, well, it's obviously stuck with me because I'm saying it now. I think that's another way of sort of bringing some positive psychology to the experience, isn't it?
Yeah, and we know from the brain, the hippocampus, is very deal with memory. And if you're motivated, it's better at absorbing memory. And if you're not motivated, you can't see a reason why, you can't memorize as well. And this is where we get the adrenaline and cortisol coming to hijack us, the amygdala hijack, and all of a sudden, even clever people can't remember their own names because we've gone into that panic zone. Yeah.
Good answer, thank you. Nick asks, how do you deal with, slightly different subject here, but how do you deal with the topic of handling challenging colleagues, such as colleagues who dominate meetings?
Oh, that's a big question, isn't it? Yeah. You can be direct back again and say to somebody, confrontation is good, but it's maybe not appropriate here. and you can deal with it, verbalize that. You can preempt it before the meeting and say to somebody, I don't like this behavior, or you can do it after the meeting. Some people don't like direct conversation, so then you go to your line manager and do it in that way. Try not to score points against somebody. I think that doesn't work. And I've done that in the past in meetings in football clubs where you're trying to prove you're better than somebody else. But again, coming back to that argument I talked about before, when you get good at stuff in life, life becomes a collaboration, not a competition. So I think if you want to be that confrontational person, pre, during, or afterwards, fine, but keep away from the during too much, because you could probably both lose on that situation. If you can't deal with that and say it to somebody, ask somebody else on your behalf to mention that to them. I know it's difficult at times, but if something doesn't feel right, then use that self-esteem, that confidence of not being scared, in a nice way, to ask them that this behavior I don't think is appropriate to make me more effective. What do you think about that? And then it's those all sorts of open-ended questions to let somebody else talk, rather than point the finger at somebody else. But you've got to be a bit brave. Brené Brown talks about being brave in life. And I think you don't have to be aggressive when you're brave. You can just state how you feel and leave it an open statement. You made me feel low today that I wasn't a professional. And then you leave the end of the sentence there and let the other person fill it in. Don't put any demands in. Don't say you must do X, Y, Z. Leave that sentence open and let them fill that gap. And you might be surprised that people then initially weren't aware they were doing that themselves. So whether you can do it or somebody else can do it, if you're going to do it, leave that gap at the end. You made me feel this way, and see what they say.
Yeah, I really like that approach, and something I use when I chair meetings, and I would be very happy to have this feedback, is I always ask how efficient or how effective the meeting was at the end, and people can then give me kind of comments afterwards. So if that doesn't happen in your meeting, perhaps you could talk to the chair or the organizer afterwards, or send a message saying, this is the part I found really beneficial from the meeting. I'd love to have contributed more, but there are a couple of people who are talking a lot, and could we look at a different approach of responding to questions? Maybe one way of doing it.
Yeah, that. You find that a lot online as well. It's a good point, that, Jenny, going through the chair and getting their feedback, because that's in many ways their job.
Yeah.
To maximize the delegates around the room, whether that's online or face to face. And I think that's it's a neat way of avoiding confrontation initially and asking them to support you. Yeah.
And one last question we've got time for, in from Natalie, saying, do you have any tips on working from home to stay motivated and not to procrastinate?
It is so easy, but if you work on your own all day long, 5, 6 days, sometimes 7 days a week, even the most motivated person will get worn out. Yeah, you're looking at one now, and I'm very highly motivated. I've worked this for a long time now, and you've got to have that contrast in your day. So if you just set your goal out to start at 8, to finish at 5 every day, and if you don't get anywhere near those hours, or you don't do half an hour too short, and you beat yourself up, you're not going to win. And I think you need contrast in your day, different types of work, but it doesn't always have to be longer is better. You can be more effective in shorter hours. And I think sometimes we equate effectiveness with that traditional 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 scenario. You must do that many hours. So working at home is difficult, but you must have contrast. If you don't get contrast in your type of work, maybe a different sort of room, maybe a different way of learning. If you're learning books, audio, internet, somebody else, that peer support, is having that contrast around you. And the human will get bored pretty quickly or get tired. And we talked about burnout before. If you've got the same stimulus all day long, and it becomes a game you'll never win. So you've got to be cute. You've got to have contrast, get support of other people. Think about how you're working, how effective you are when you're working this way. But generally speaking, the longer you go, broadly speaking, the less effective you're going to be. And you've got to keep recharging yourself.
Well, on that point, I'm going to suggest that we end our session today, because there's no way on a topic on prioritisation and productivity, we're going to overrun. So 1 minute before the end, thank you everybody for joining us and your contributions, and a really big thank you to you, Ross, and I hope you can take a bit of a rest now and recover fully. So we're really grateful to you for joining when you weren't feeling 100%, and thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Stop the recording now.